I saw Black Panther 5 times in theaters. 3 times in less than 2 weeks. This is really unusual for me because I'm much more of a DC fanboy than a Marvel fanboy. And I don't believe my comic collection actually contains even one single appearance by King T'Challa or his, alter ego. There's several reasons for this. The reason I saw it 5 times in theaters probably starts with the fact that my brother gave me a movie pass card, which was a great deal for me and probably a bad deal for them. I'm probably one of those people the company wishes never even touched their product. The main reason, though, for my rewatches was pretty simple. It's a good movie. Like, really good. For one thing, this film makes utterly fantastic use of its cast. I mean, seriously. This thing is stacked. But the real reason why this film stands out to me as a social studies teacher is because of the way this film tackles cultural identity and the interplay such things have with politics and the sense of self for individual characters. Kind of like how my own sense of identity is forged by my own country. The film deals with the ideas of racism, ethnocentrism, globalism, isolationism, and does it all with a pretty deft touch. In general, this film may very well be an excellent tool for introducing someone young and perhaps a little bit ignorant to some of the key elements of sociology, anthropology, and a little bit of the way that politics can be used as literary devices in films. So without further ado, Franchise Wars Podcast proudly presents Black Panther's Sociology. We first meet Lupita Nyong'o's Nakia when she is hiding in plain sight among a caravan of captured women being driven through the jungle by unsavory-seeming military men. As T'Challa cuts through them on his mission to extract her, her very first words and actions display her greatest character trait. She shows compassion and a wider world view by halting T'Challa before he can unknowingly kill a young child soldier. Her following dialogue with T'Challa establishes that she is on a mission to help rescue these women, and while it goes unstated, likely to end whatever evil has rendered them unto bondage. She is a war dog, we learn, one of Wakanda's many spies in the outside world. And she is not blind to the suffering present outside Wakanda. Nakia repeatedly pushes T'Challa and others to consider the larger picture, not just of Wakanda as a country, but Wakanda and the wider world. She attempts to sway T'Challa to seriously consider the idea of opening Wakanda's borders to the outside world, and not in the militaristic way hypothesized by the border tribe's leader, or in the imperialistic schemes of Killmonger. Instead, what Nakia has suggested is a combination of moral globalism and use of something called soft power. Soft power is a term used to describe a nation's capacity to impact and shape policy without the use of force or coercion. Nakia is proposing that Wakanda use its technological advances and a combination of incredibly valuable resources and equally evolved economy to take a place of leadership among the nations of the world, in the same way that superpowers like the USSR and USA could leverage and persuade other nations to enact protections and policies they desired by using economic strength and political goodwill, whenever they weren't, going back to the hard power option by supporting dictatorial regimes, revolutionary groups, or, subduing once independent countries under various pretexts. Nakia is not envisioning an imperial rule, like Killmonger, but instead a beneficial and cooperative sort of leadership. And the reason Nakia can push for such things is because she can truly put the world into worldview. As a war dog, Nakia is arguably the most balanced example of a true patriotic Wakandan and an experienced world traveler among the main cast. She not only seeks to oppose human trafficking in Africa, but also poaching and black marketeering in South Korea, on top of refugee and humanitarian crises across the world. Nakia sees T'Challa's responsibility as not just to the people of Wakanda, but to humanity as a whole. She mentions numerous altruistic movements and emphatically calls for Wakanda to not just do them, but do it better. Some of her ease with empathizing with the outside world might be connected to her hailing from the River Tribe. After all, rivers are humanity's original transportation hubs, and the people of that tribe are probably the most familiar with the 4 other tribes among Wakandans. So Nakia may very well have been raised with an education into how the priorities and needs of different cultures can be met through cooperation and goodwill. This almost certainly plays a part in her opposition to Killmonger's rule, beyond her personal relationship with T'Challa. She has to have had first-hand experience with interlopers, provocateurs, and operators of Killmonger's ilk, and while not as familiar with his thinking as Agent Ross, she clearly sees how this man is not truly Wakandan in his thinking, and in how he is the very thing Wakanda has sought to avoid throughout its history: the destructive drive of conquest and subjugation. And so, Nakia stands against him, and on the side of not just global peace, but Wakandan peace as well, and the reign of T'Challa. But that thought about the whole 5 tribes of Wakanda brings to mind another character and another aspect of the film that I think deserves more study: that of M'Baku and ethnicity. I'm not gonna lie, the only thing I knew about Winston Duke as M'Baku going into the film was that they weren't going to fully adapt his comic book alter ego, due to the unfortunate implications of calling an African man man-ape. And between you and me, I am glad I don't have to use that terminology either. Duke got to flex that rarest of acting abilities: timing! For both great comic and dramatic effect. M'Baku and his men grunting like gorillas should just be goofy, but the first time you hear it, it's actually just kind of intimidating. Then it is funny again when he uses it as a mute button for Agent Ross. Then it becomes just all kinds of awesome when it's he and his people's entrance music before he literally picks up a border tribesman with one hand to wave in the air just so everyone knows they're doomed. You want kids to eat their vegetables? Tell them they can do that. But what really got me invested in M'Baku and the Jabari as a whole was the way the film subtly portrays them as the de facto minority political party and minority ethnic group in Wakanda. And all that was intentional. While the other 4 tribes clearly have distinctions between themselves, they all follow the same simple naming convention of occupation/location tribe, live together in harmony in the capital, speak the same real-world African language, which is spelled like this, but I'm not going to try and mess it up, and embrace technology, and if T'Challa's second visit to the ancestral lands is accurate, have representatives among the great kings and Black Panthers of Wakanda. In contrast, the Jabari speak a different language, are established early on to be isolated in the mountains far away from the capital city, are far less enamored with technology than their fellow Wakandans, though not devoid of it, are the only tribe to avoid using vibranium weapons, preferring the wooden knobkerry. Though, come to think of it, if it's made of wood from Wakanda, chances are it's a little bit tougher than regular oak. Same thing with M'Baku, come to think of it. Explicitly have not been visited by a king in centuries, and perhaps most importantly, worship a different god. That last one is the one that makes me the most curious. And it feels like maybe the thread to follow to truly understand the Jabari as a distinct ethnic group among the Wakandans. The Jabari are traditionalists, geographically isolated from the rest of Wakanda. And while T'Challa's uncle claims it was entirely voluntary on their part, his words and the imagery used imply the Jabari were already outside the Wakandan norm at that point in time. Perhaps while mainstream Wakandans worship Bast, the Panther god hailing from Egypt, the Jabari's worship of Hanuman, a gorilla god from India, acting as a catalyst not just for their isolation, but also possibly their refusal to bow before the king. I mean, after all, he's garbed in the form of Bast, not their god. And that difference between the tribes, that friction and tension between the religions and the resulting differences between the Jabari and the rest of their fellow Wakandans, pretty clearly defines ethnicity versus race. Race, as much as it factors into our world today, is still strictly a sociological construction. The melanin content in one's skin only impacts that person's identity if society decides it should. Ethnicity, on the other hand, depends on quantifiable cultural factors like language, national loyalty, and of course, religion. In Wakanda, skin color doesn't matter, because race doesn't matter, but ethnicity does. That's why there's a fascinating subtext to the ritual combat between M'Baku and T'Challa. M'Baku was introduced wearing a gorilla mask, invokes Hanuman, and is promptly matched by T'Challa donning a Panther mask that we don't ever see again. Are these masks just ritual armor, or are they some kind of religious relic designed to invoke those competing gods of Hanuman and Bast? What happens if M'Baku wins? Does T'Challa, if he survives, remain Black Panther, or would the followers of Hanuman retire Bast's representative in favor of their own? Some great guerrilla warrior wearing vibranium? Or would there be no Wakandan champion using the heart-shaped herb because the Jabari don't acknowledge it? Food for thought. Speaking of ethnicity, Eric Stevens, Killmonger, or N'Jadaka to give his birth name, as played by Michael B. Jordan, rarely has a scene where he's not smiling a bit towards the rest of the cast. This is not a friendly, reassuring gesture. These are the bared teeth of a predator toying with his food, much like the golden ones forming the image of a gaping maw on his own Black Panther/Golden Jaguar mask. That's not to say that Prince and later King N'Jadaka can't be funny. It's just that humor isn't apparent or welcomed by anyone else in the film. It's a hostile display of verbal warfare enjoyed by Killmonger and ourselves, the audience safely outside his reach, but ever the witness to his bravado, which is equal parts endearing and terrifying. This fierce, very American aggression combines with the character's blunt and irreverent nature to draw a powerful contrast with the dignified and calm Wakandans, which makes perfect sense. While Killmonger may have a Wakandan father, Wakandan birth name, and know the language far more than he lets on, he's ethnically more American than traditional Wakandan. His slang, personality, worldview, and very identity are defined by the clash between his father's idyllic homeland and the harsh reality of his own birth nation. Killmonger views everything through the lens of an African American, which is just as culturally unique as any other single nation-state or identity, like the Wakandans. He constantly refutes the Wakandans' view of themselves as separate from their African neighbors and race, constantly grouping all African descended peoples as one monolithic group instead of a cornucopia of radically different peoples, again kind of displaying the more American approach to ethnic identity. At the end of the film, while dueling his cousin T'Challa one last time, he disregards his kinsman's pleas about the safety of Wakanda, in part out of spite for Wakanda's abandonment of him, but in part because he views Wakanda as physical resources and not as some sacred homeland. Because his views of Wakanda is informed through an American perspective, perfect example of ethnocentrism, there's an important disconnect between the figurative language of Wakanda and his own. But it's his views of his ancestors and personal history that really distinguishes him ethnically as an African American as opposed to a pure Wakandan. When T'Challa visited the ancestral plane, he encountered the spirits of Wakanda's past kings and champions, with everyone dressed in traditional Wakandan garb and viewed through Wakanda's own geography. When N'Jadaka undergoes the same experience, he is transported back to his family's Oakland apartment, still wearing the same blue hoodie he wore the day he found his father's fresh corpse. This not only shows how N'Jadaka never grew past this point emotionally, but how his ancestry, at least in his mind and soul, is separated from that of traditional Wakandans and based in America. But even more tellingly, Killmonger's last words and request are to be buried in the sea, alongside his maternal ancestors carried from the mother continent in slave ships. At the end, he acknowledges that as much as his father's legacy defined his last days, he himself has a stronger personal connection to the tragic history of his black brothers and sisters carried to a new land and fate of bondage and persecution. Which is why arguably his most devastatingly accurate line is also one that sadly highlights his own motivation decay.
Not your own. But didn't life start right here on this continent? So ain't all people your people?
Killmonger is forcing T'Challa and the other Wakandans to acknowledge the outside world and the responsibility they have towards the well-being of their fellow man. He is in a sad way totally justified in looking back at the history of his people, stripped of their original cultural identities and names, their families and their lives and their very freedoms, and finds himself asking,
Where was Wakanda?
And no one really has a good answer for that. King T'Chaka's decision to leave a little boy, his own nephew, behind in a context clearly more harmful and poisonous to his development only exacerbates the issue, making it even more literal and personal for Killmonger. In a strange way, he and Nakia see the same problems, feel the same indignation and righteous disgust with them, but approach the answers in diametrically opposed manners. And unfortunately, Killmonger's answer to the problems reflects some of the ugliest aspects of the world he was born into. Where Nakia sees altruism and cooperation as the key to saving the world, Killmonger sees only violence and conquest. The sun will never set on the Wakandan Empire is pure imperialist, or as Wakandans would say, colonizer thinking. It's a stock phrase used by the Spanish upon subjugating people groups in the New World and Asia, and defined in the modern world by the British Empire, the archetypal colonizing superpower. Killmonger's internalization of imperialist thinking is best represented by his acquiring of the African tribal mask from the British Museum. After insulting and talking down to the administrator for, having this stolen artifact from an African tribe that didn't belong to her culture, he then steals it himself because he's feeling it. Even though, from what we can tell, it's not Wakandan, and it's not American. It's just another piece of loot, for him, as well as the British Museum. But Killmonger and Nakia both managed to have an impact on our main character, King T'Challa, the Black Panther. Initially, T'Challa seeks to be a very traditional Wakandan ruler, especially in regards to its centuries-long practice of isolationism. The idea is that Wakanda, and the world outside its borders, will be better served if the latter maintains its blissful ignorance of the unrevealed superpower in the heart of Africa, and that the former will remain pure and safe so long as its isolation is maintained. And it's not hard to see why that idea developed. The opening sequence, featuring N'Jobu relating the story of Wakanda's birth to the innocent pre-Killmonger N'Jadaka, reminds us of the violence, enslavement, and murder stretching across human history in the land beyond Wakanda's borders. In contrast, Wakanda, secured behind advanced technological cloaking and the policy of isolationism, seems a utopian paradise freed from such things. But of course, the story can't be that simple. And even young N'Jadaka can see that, pointedly asking tough questions that his father is trying to answer in his own way. Though the very next scene and the resulting plotline deconstruct the view piece by piece. N'Jobu has already determined he cannot countenance the injustice he sees in America, and his actions to try and rectify that have resulted in an outsider, the mercenary Clow, blindsiding the homeland and leaving a bloody swath of dead Wakandans in his wake. King T'Chaka's efforts to procure justice and the security for his kingdom results in the death of N'Jobu, and the abandonment of N'Jadaka to the world that will forge him into Killmonger, and his continued practice of Wakanda's isolationism will simply prevent Clow from being caught until well after his own death. This ends up causing a civil war, deadly enough that it threatens to plunge the country into a possibly unwinnable war. Wakanda's isolationism is the root of the paternal sins that will almost destroy it, and T'Challa will pay a very painful and personal price for it. T'Challa begins the film as a good mainline traditionalist, who expresses numerous reservations and doubts towards Nakia's more globalist desires, even allowing his other confidant, W'Kabi, to reinforce the accepted isolationist dogma. It's even implied this adherence to isolationism may be the reason why the clearly affectionate and equitable relationship between T'Challa and Nakia is one of exes and not an official coupling. That's how deep T'Challa's devotion to the ancient policy is, and how strong Nakia's rejection of it is as well. And unfortunately, it leaves him wide open to Killmonger's coup. And T'Challa, and his father before him, must both know this is not the first time Wakanda's isolationism has endangered it. King T'Chaka was just beginning to crack open the borders just a bit after finding out that Ultron came within inches of destroying the entire Earth with Wakanda's own vibranium, only prevented by the actions of total outsiders. T'Challa's continuation of the pursuit of Klaue isn't just a matter of legal retribution for his previous crime. It's a national security matter that this thief was an accessory to the near doom of Wakanda. But even these proactive measures that they take, with their war dogs and their pursuit of known threats, does nothing to stop an American black operative from invoking his bloodline right to maim T'Challa, slay his honorary uncle Zuri, destroy the potential for future Black Panthers, and start a civil war using textbook colonizer tactics. Wakanda needs aid, but has none to call on, aside from the minority party the Jabari, the Dora Milaje, and whatever else they can scrape together. If they fail to stop Killmonger, Wakanda is in for a world of hurt. The power of the kingdom, while far greater than any one other nation, will be insufficient to prevent simple logistics and the counterpart technological advancement from overwhelming the Wakandans, though the war that will result will almost certainly devastate all participants. A clash of miniaturized vibranium weapons spread throughout the globe, matched with air and infantry superiority, against arc reactors, durable and deadly exosuits, sheer weight and numbers, and the rest of humanity's diabolically imaginative inventiveness with weapons, there may not be anyone left for Killmonger to gloat at. If Wakanda had been involved in the world, it may have prevented Klaue from stealing its vibranium and arming Ultron. If Wakanda was involved in the world, N'Jadaka may have been raised to be a valuable asset for the cause of peace and stability. If Wakanda was involved in the world, all of humanity might be better off in the Marvel Universe, with Wakandan leadership heading off evils like slavery, conquest, and genocide. But Wakanda wasn't. And so T'Challa, when once more face to face with his father and the collective kings and Black Panthers of Wakanda, must reject their decisions, their failings, and their isolationism. He must stand his ground against the weight of history and yell to these legends whose blood flows through his veins,
"You were wrong to abandon him. I chose my people. I chose Wakanda. Our future depended
You are wrong! All of you are wrong! To turn your backs on the rest of the world!
We let the fear of our discovery stop us from doing what is right. No more. I cannot stay here with you.
and thus T'Challa completes his transformation in the film. To save the day, he must re-heal the ties with the Jabari, who have been ostracized and effectively disenfranchised for their cultural differences and objections in the mainstream Wakandan way of life. He must retake his throne from his American cousin, but he must also acknowledge the responsibility Killmonger has revealed they owe their brothers and sisters that they have neglected, and he must forge ahead towards the use of soft power, diplomacy, and moral strength in the way Nakia has campaigned for. In the end, this is why when you get to Infinity War, Wakanda and King T'Challa end up leading the charge against Thanos, as he dares to court death. In summary, Black Panther is not just a good movie from a dramatic perspective, but also one from a sociological perspective as well. And really, more people should watch it with that in mind. Thanks for watching this Franchise Wars video. If you enjoyed our content, feel free to check out any of our podcast episodes, including Teen Titans vs. Teen Titans Go, The Force Awakens vs. The Last Jedi, and, just this week, a Superman TV podcast. Also, feel free to check out our Tumblr if you like some of our art or more of our articles. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.